I don't suppose that any of us really saw it coming. Jack was dead. Killed himself yesterday morning. I mean, it's not that we were that close, especially in the latter part of his life, but it still gave me this uneasy feeling. And I'm fully aware that death is supposed to have that effect on you. But when you become disconnected enough, sometimes it doesn't as much as you know it should. Like, you know that people are dying all over the world for a myriad of reasons, and there are kids starving on the streets, and you know that's sad, but I guess you don't feel it. But for whatever reason, death of this guy I only knew for a few weeks had me pretty upset. I don't understand it. I mean, I'm not crying. It's just a cold feeling. I think that this unexpected melancholy could be attributed to the last time I saw him 2 months earlier. He looked pallid. He looked scared. I just passed by him in a grocery store. We exchanged brief conversation, but you could tell he just wanted to go. He wanted to get away. I don't know if it was necessarily from me or something else altogether. Either way, it was a strange encounter. Seeing him dark around the eyes, looking like he was constantly on the verge of tears in that supermarket at 3 in the morning. What were the goddamn chances of that in a city this freaking big? I don't even remember what he said. I don't suppose it mattered. Nothing substantive. Nothing that would explain what happened, and yet here I am, sitting alone in my unlit apartment, just sitting here, cold. And I submit, a bit afraid. I don't know of what, but something is distinctly wrong. The next day, I'm told that I've been invited to the funeral. I must stress, I only knew the man for a few weeks. We met through some mutual friends that I worked with, and we stayed at his cabin a few times, but after that, we never spoke again. I don't even know where he lived, but according to everyone I knew, he only stayed at the cabin a few times a year. I only ever saw him when he let me stay there, and I guess he let a lot of people stay there, a lot of people fitting the, starving artist archetype, with nowhere else to go. So I suppose he was a fairly generous guy, though I have no idea how he could afford to keep that place running, or how most of those miserable junkies paid him back. Nevertheless, it was a fine time given the circumstances, and many of us made decent company. A lot of them felt like bizarre remnants of the Beat generation. A lot of those traveling philosopher poet types that I thought were all gone, but had apparently just moved into some weirdo's middle-of-nowhere cabin, kept afloat by mysterious and probably dubious means. And I only found out when I was invited to the funeral. Surely there must be some people closer to him. I mean, we only spoke a few times. Still, I intended on going, and it's not as though I had a whole lot else going on. So I went, and was surprised to find about 4 people were there. I recognized only 2 of them, Nathan Grove and Laura Pickman. The other was some sickly thin guy in an ill-fitting suit, who looked like he just wandered in on happenstance. Despite the weather, Nathan was wearing big orange aviator glasses and he was smoking a clove cigarette. He nods to me with a stoic expression.
I can't stand funerals. Fucking filthy ordeals.
He says, "Well, Nate, you really didn't need to go. How well did you even know him?"
Good fucking question. I could ask you the same thing. I showed up because I wasn't sure which Jack this was. Evidently, not one I cared about, so I'll be making my leave.
Lovely seeing you again.
Yeah, you too.
He says quickly, pushing past. I always remembered Nathan as being quite an abrasive sort. I recall him saying he was a journalist of some kind, but it was rare I ever saw him off as either. He never seemed to be all there. Laura, on the other hand, I actually was quite close with at the time. We spoke often, both working as freelance artists with similar interests but radically different styles. As the funeral draws to a merciful close, the priest finished reciting from the Book of Yuth. I go to Lauren, asking her how she's been.
Fine. Scraping by.
Well, that's better than before.
Sure, but let's face it, there are about 1 million of us in this city and nothing to raise us above the others. Work is scarce.
Almost like we should have gotten real jobs.
God forbid.
So, what convinced you to show up for this?
He had a lot of people around. Honestly, I think that's probably why he ended up doing it. He probably just let people stay with him so he wouldn't feel so lonely, and then as soon as people stopped going, that was it.
You think?
Maybe, I don't know. Again, I didn't know him very closely. I don't think you did either.
No, I didn't really. Weird guy. I saw him a while back in a corner store getting groceries. He looked like a mess.
That's funny. A friend of mine saw him recently too. Said he looked like he hadn't been sleeping or shaving. I guess when you spend most of your time in the middle of nowhere in a secluded cabin, cleanliness isn't your top priority.
You do have to wonder what'll happen to the cabin.
Gave it away.
To who?
Anyone who would come to his funeral? That's what the lawyer over there told me was the arrangement he'd asked for. I don't know how that works legally, but he wanted it, along with everything inside it, shared by us.
Does Nathan know?
Nathan doesn't give a shit.
Did you want to go there, see what's still left?
I don't have a car.
I do. We started driving late in the morning. It was a long trip. It'd take us at least a few hours. We would be lucky to get there by evening. Neither of us really expected to find much, but we both seemed to be under the impression that it would be sort of a fun excursion, and a brief escape from the crushing pressures of the city. We passed through the bright streets, through the withering suburbs and towns, past the forsaken and forgotten war-torn parts of old, exchanging witty remarks along the way. I forgot how much fun we used to have. We sounded like characters in a Tarantino film, with snide pop culture deconstructions and humorous anecdotes. It was very recognizable country again, as we finally traveled west of Gilmarth and got into the deep country towns. The ones that are falling apart and dangerous. We drive through past a vale of weeping willows and begin to see the string of discrete houses intermittently scattered across the land. It feels like we're in Gummo all of a sudden, with weird yokels staring at us. We understand the situation here to be dire, but it's so rare that we truly get to see it firsthand. The shambling people with their sunken eyes are bleak enough, but the sights we pass are enough to drag our attitudes down immediately. It's only gotten worse since last we came here. And we hope to pass through before the sun finally goes down. We see a man taking a bath in a tub just sitting in the middle of a cracked and fallen basketball court, and broken windows, and eventually corpses. Just corpses in the street. Some of them dangling from street lamps, others just on the pavement, bloodied and beaten from being stepped on and dragged aside. We both looked to each other, not even sure what to say. It was a sad state of affairs, but one knew we had no way of helping. This place was doomed to sink into slow and painful oblivion, damned by forces outside of their control. We finally reach the limits of housing, and pass into deep woods as the evening grows dim. Our conversation finally begins anew after a lot of silence.
Well, that was bleak.
Yeah, I didn't realize how bad it had gotten around here.
It's only going to get worse. Pretty soon there won't be a here. And I hate to say it, but it'll be a merciful death. Have you read this yet?
What is it?
I know the guy who wrote it, Walter Sunderland. He's some weirdo from Gilmarth.
Is it any good?
Some of it. He had this really obnoxious prose that beats you over the head, and the symbolism is much more blatant in its meaning than I think he realizes, but the stories are fairly well conceived.
So, should I actually read any of it?
I suppose. Come the Dark was an alright story. It was about one of those idyllic 1950s nuclear family towns, but there's all this dark shit right under the surface, right? They're all secretly kind of fucked up, but they restrain it. It's kept beneath the surface. And then for 1 week, inexplicably, the sun just stops setting. It's just daytime, constantly, with no distinguishable night, and for whatever reason, people start losing it. Then it's all rape and murder for a while, until the end of the week, and the sun sets again, and everything goes back to normal.
Oh, I get it. Nice. So is that the whole thing?
Pretty much.
Well, why should I read it now?
You might as well, I'm leaving a lot out.
Hey, we're getting close, right?
Yeah, I think so. Take a left here.
We pull up and finally reach the clearing where stands the cabin. It's not enormous. It's honestly hard to imagine how so many people were staying here. It's real dark when we finally show up, and we have to get our flashlights. Approaching the cabin, I look to Laura. What the hell are we gonna find in there?
A lot of old needles, bad poetry, sadness.
Sounds about right, I say, relatively calm. We enter to find it a mess, paper strung up along the walls all over. The floor and tables are littered with unlabeled VHS tapes. The furniture looks filthy and unused. The black door is wide open, and the animals have likely been let in. To my amazement, the lights flicker when I flip the switch. Holy shit! Power! I exclaim, breaking the uneasy silence.
How about that?
We pass through the kitchen and enter the all-too-familiar living room. There's a single mattress on the floor, in front of the television screen. Beyond that is a large window, and the dark forest trees are rustling outside. We begin to investigate, turning things over and examining what we can. The house was full of strange notes, amid what appeared to be arcane symbology. He also had a few of the sorts of drawings one would expect from Jack, having known him as briefly as we did. One that particularly amused me was a crude doodle of two Teletubbies with VHS slots for genitals, one inserting a tape into the other, and pornography playing on its little screen. I giggle a bit at this. It looks to be older than the ones that are just symbols, and more unsettling yet, the ones with notes. Notes like, Tape 23, Playground. I don't know where the children went. Tape 27, The Veil. It just keeps expanding. That followed by a string of letters that don't appear to be from our alphabet. And most concerningly of all, Tape 32, Hell 2005. This is the final one. I'm so sorry. I understand now. The world was ended in the year 2005, and we've all been in hell ever since. As far as I can tell, Tape 32 was the last one he'd written on. He doesn't date any of them, but I think this was the last one he'd be watching before he offed himself, which certainly made me ponder the nature of the tape. Showing these to Laura, she said,
Maybe he was into snuff or something, some weird underground porn thing, and got caught up in something too big.
I really doubt they'd read something like that. I don't know. This whole thing feels off. She shrugs and starts going through the tapes, and I swear to God, I feel like somebody is watching me from the forest. I darted over to the large open window. The winds were getting faster, and all I see is blackness, and the faint outline of a thick forest, and the trees waving wildly. I intensely stare out, still feeling it, before Laura grabs my attention.
Hey, Charlie, I found the VCR.
I turn to her. I have the weirdest feeling. You don't think any of the people from the town followed us, do you?
No? This place is miles from there. It's miles from anywhere. We're totally alone. Don't scare me like that. Did you see someone?
I just had a weird feeling.
Well, don't scare yourself. This is weird enough as it is. We're going through the scrawlings of a dead madman. I don't even remember why I thought this was a good idea to begin with.
Well, I suppose that since we're here, we should try watching at least some of the tapes.
Obviously.
She hands me a pile. Only one of them is labeled. Hell. 2005. Oh, fuck. This one. Let's do this one, I say.
Alrighty.
She replies, getting down and sliding the tape in. I feel a sickened feeling almost immediately, sitting down next to Laura. As we turn the TV on, the static and loud blare immediately startle me.
Would you relax? Christ.
She says, giving me a mocking grin. She presses play, and the tape begins. It's fuzzy, one of those things that was clearly taped off some TV channel. It was some old advertisements that I'm sure were from the year 2005, though the audio is quite muffled and the image is still quite fuzzy. In the top left corner are the blocky pixel letters of a VHS recording, like you'd see in a home movie. The words Hell 2005. The picture is strongly saturated, and it looks like it was recorded in the aforementioned year. It plays what appears to be a soap ad, followed by something else that cuts out too much to tell, a short ad for cutlery, and then it cuts to black, and then silence. No longer is the room illuminated. And then it cuts back in. It's scratchy and glitching like mad. I can't really tell what's going on. It looks strange and it looks bright, and then it comes into focus. We both stare wide-eyed and shocked. I sincerely wish I could explain it. I wish it was explainable, but it's not. We were staring at a horror so alien to us that we had no way of fully comprehending what it was. It was bright, like a color we'd never seen before, and it was loud, shrieking in a language we'd never known. And there was something else. Something distinctly lively, something that was very much unlike any living thing I know. And then the screen goes black, and it's silent once more. We both sat, shaking like mad, tears running down our eyes. We'd seen something that we couldn't even imagine, that no man could imagine. I eventually look at Laura. She's beginning to sob like crazy, and I do too. Breaking out into total anxiety, I reach out and grab her in my arms, both of us feeling very cold, very empty, and very afraid. The screen cuts back in. The video now shows us, Laura and I, conjoined by a long strip of pulsating flesh between us. Our eyes are sunken in, and we're clearly in pain. Looking back into the camera, it's showing us exactly as we are in the room, and I immediately shut the TV off. Gripping her hand tightly, I try raising myself to my feet, and she follows me. Silently, we both turn the light back on, and I face her once more. Laura, I don't know what... She just nods, still too shaken to talk. Without saying any more words, we both instinctively move over to the mattress and hold each other tightly throughout the night, intermittently breaking out into tears, occasionally thinking that we were not alone in the cabin, but way too afraid to look around. Eventually, Dawn mercifully breaks free. Neither of us had gotten any rest, but we were able to take several naps throughout the morning now, looking after each other in the light. Neither of us had gotten any rest, but we were able to take several naps throughout the morning now, looking after each other in the light, just until we could find the energy to drive back. But when we slept, the nightmares we had were like no other. It was a torment like nothing I'd ever experienced. Each time I left my eyes closed for too long, the hallucinations got worse throughout the day. As we start to drive, I see strange figures populating the roadside on the highway. I see them all the way, and I have a splitting headache. I feel sick. And I soon find that Laura is holding my hand, still shaking. I've no doubt that she sees them too. As the trip continues, I find our conversations become more intimate, and we truly begin to know each other, brought together by this horrible experience. When we do return, the nightmares and hallucinations continue, and working becomes more difficult. But Laura and I only become closer through it. Having no one else who understands what we're experiencing, we take comfort in each other's company. After some time, she eventually moves in with me fully, and our relationship becomes a romantic one. Over time, we become the only people that we can connect with, and our time is spent increasingly closer. The hallucinations only got worse and worse for the both of us, until there came a day where she became fed up with it. She said that she was leaving, and that I was only going to remind her of what she saw. It was too much, and I never saw her again. Feeling now totally alone and empty, I drift about, still plagued by horrific visions. They get worse ever still, and I find myself often collapsing unconscious due to my lack of sleep. And it all culminates when I awaken from nightmares to find a tall, elderly man standing at the end of my room. He stares at me until I black out again. I soon began missing deadlines, and I find it increasingly difficult to pay the rent. I hardly eat anymore, and it's beginning to show. Looking more sickly, I realize I need to find some sort of help. I begin socializing again, seeing my old friends, and as I do, I meet somebody else, a well-rounded girl that takes an interest in me, someone undisturbed by the likes of what both I and Laura had experienced. And we began dating, and despite the hallucinations, things seemed to go well. It seems that perhaps I could get my life together again. Our time is sweet, and the hallucinations briefly dim. She has only the faintest understanding of my current condition, but she does what she can to support me through it. But it doesn't take long before the figure returns anew, and the elderly man looms over my bed again. It is after this that I look over in my bed. She looks so serene, so at peace, and totally oblivious to the horror that I know. And in that moment, I know that this will never work, that I could never involve another. I shift out of bed, not waking her, and put my clothes on, passing by the elderly man and leaving without so much as a word. I never saw her again, either. I couldn't bear to return. I don't know what happened to her. It didn't matter. I had to escape. I started to drive, and I wasn't going to stop until the next day. I eventually traveled to a cold lakeside mining town on a rainy afternoon, spending most of the rest of my money on a hotel and food. I still didn't know what I was going to do. The elderly man provided some frequent visitations. No longer afraid to look at him, I could see that his flesh was gray and withered. He had black eyes, and he stared directly at me. "Who are you?" I asked, to no reply. "Come on, tell me, what do you want?" As I approach him, he starts to shake, shaking so fast he becomes a blur, more so the closer I get. I raise my fist and swing at him, only to find he disappears. I stand now alone in the hotel room, unsure of what needs to be done. The next morning, I scrape together whatever I can, heading for a local bar, sitting down and getting what I can. I wipe my brow and dart my eyes around the room. How many of these people are real? How many of them How many of them am I just imagining? I can see some of them are twisting and warping, staring. One of them approaches me, and their face looks like it's just one big smile. I get up, going to sit somewhere more quiet. I sit at a small table. There's a man smoking at an adjacent table. He's looking at me. I try not to look back. I'm not sure if he's another hallucination. Eventually he breaks the silence. He says. I turn to him.
"You look like you've seen some
Yeah, you could say that. Without asking, he shifts over to my table.
Well, you don't look like you're in the army.
He says in an almost condescending manner.
And you don't strike me like some sort of junkie either.
I'm just a painter.
Oh, would I know your work?
Probably not. I guess I was published in a few magazines.
Magazines, huh? The big time.
He smiles.
So was I right in assuming that something happened to shake you?
Could you tell?
Twitchy, pale, dark around the eyes, and a 1,000-yard stare.
All right, fair enough. I don't even know where I'd begin.
Well, could you tell me what? Well, son, let me tell you, there's nothing you could tell me that I would be shocked by.
I look up at him, almost hesitantly. God, I wish I shared your naivety, I joke softly. He laughs uproariously.
Is that so, huh? Well, shit, kid, you better have something pretty serious.
I can't help but produce a sinister grin. I tell him the story of it as extensively as I can, right from the point where I was struggling to pay for myself and went to live with some weirdo's cabin, to discussing said weirdo, and the events that led me back to his cabin, and the night Laura and I saw the tape. He looks at me with an inquisitive look.
Christ, kid. You really got my attention now. You can't even describe the tape in any more detail?
I really couldn't. It would be like describing a color. It's just, it's something. It's not something I could share. It was so alien. He looks away, shifting his face around a bit, appearing to be thinking quite intensely. Despite all this, he's retained a very cool and slick demeanor. Style seems to emanate from every motion, from the subtle to the grand and sweeping, and this shows more so than ever when he responds.
You know, when I was on the front lines of the Yith War, the big one, you no doubt know about it, though you wouldn't have been born at the time. Anyway, we saw our fair share of weirdness, and I'll tell you, boy, I never believed in a god. But fighting them, you start to believe in something. I saw terrible things, some things I didn't even think possible. But I remember very distinctly the worst night of my life. And keep in mind, I've had 2 failed marriages, my best friend was murdered, and my mother drank herself to death when I was 10. But that night, we were raiding a compound full of the cultists, as became the norm. We had them overrun, hiding out in this bunker, right? But when we opened the place up, I remember the odor so distinctly, we all had to vomit. We couldn't even get inside. Not that any of us would have wanted to. The walls were lined with this massive living thing. We don't even know what it was, but it was in the center of the room. In the center of the room, there was this...
He pauses for a moment.
Well, something. I don't know how you would describe it. It was almost like a man, but its features were warped in the most horrific manner. I had the good sense to look away from it, but most didn't. And those who didn't die staring ended up killing themselves before we got back to camp. I saw some real crazy shit in the war, kid, but nothing beat that thing's weird fucking face staring back at me.
He finishes off his drink, soon ordering more. Putting out a cigarette, he asks me what I think. I don't really know. I think we both got a glimpse of something much bigger than ourselves.
Really gives you a new perspective on things. After the war, I became a singer, you know.
He says, suddenly grinning.
I had myself a few hits. You listen to much music, kid?
Well, not recently. What did you do?
I'm sorry to hear that. There's really only a few reasons I spent time in a dingy little bar like this.
He turns around and motions to a jukebox directly behind us. He slips a quarter in and without even looking sets a song to play. His voice recognizably begins a fast-paced 50s crooner song that he begins mouthing the lyrics to. Evidently the smoking has not done a lot for his voice these days, and he probably couldn't sing along with it properly. I can't help but smile when I see the bartender rub his face, showing that he's becoming fed up with this. So, Mr.
Danny Walker, better known by my stage name, Roy Walker.
I'm Charlie Brighton. Well, Mr. Walker, do you really come in here just to get people listening to your old glory days like this?
No, my dear boy. I travel a lot these days. I've been helping out some old friends of mine. But there's at least one of these babies in most of the older towns like this, and the ladies still fall for it every time.
I raise an eyebrow. Do they know?
I've always been a ladies' man, kid. Doesn't matter how old I get. I still have my old moves and my old tunes. It's been a slow night.
I see. I'll have you know I'm not a lady.
I know, but I took pity on you, kid. I'm always interested in hearing from a fellow wayward soul.
Well, I appreciate it. I've been feeling pretty isolated.
So you're single, eh? Plenty of desperate ladies around these sorts of towns. No offense.
I had one a little while back. I became too distant for it to work. I don't really know where I should be going.
Tough call. If I were you, I'd leave it all behind. Admit to yourself that you'll never understand it fully, and don't waste your life obsessing over something that'll only bring you misery. You're still young.
I nod. I know, you're probably right.
I am. Trust me.
So you said you were helping out some friends?
Yeah, some people I used to work with during my singing days. I wish I could tell you more about it, but they really don't want me spreading it around.
I understand.
So I wish you luck. I have urgent business to attend to, but I hope you can sort yourself out. Talk to you later, kid.
You too. I eventually leave, almost an hour after that. Still having no idea where I'm going anymore, I eventually head back into the city. Hopefully I can stay with a friend, though I'm very much deprived of such a luxury. I try calling Laura from a phone booth. Hello? Laura, it's Charlie. Not well. The hallucinations are getting bad, and I'm broke. I hate to ask, but can I stay with you for a bit? I seriously have nowhere else. Thank you, thank you. I get to her apartment feeling my face and realizing it's been weeks since I shaved. She lets me in and I find her apartment lined with paintings of the figures that have been haunting both of us. I look around the room, not immediately responding to her. Most startlingly of all was an immensely detailed portrait of the Grey Man, surrounded by engulfing darkness.
Charlie,
Yeah?
are you alright?
I told you I wasn't.
Right, of course. Haven't got much better, huh?
No.
Mine haven't either, but I can usually drown them out in some way or another.
Not wanting to think about what she meant by that, I sit down on the couch. So it really wasn't going to work with us, was it?
Oh, Charlie. It was hard enough letting you back in here. It was nice, really. We were more than compatible, but the circumstances have made that, well, you understand. I haven't really been enjoying the company of others, at least not socially. Not for anything more than brief encounters.
I stare out, feeling very forlorn. We both clearly feel bad about it. I look back on what we might have had, and a smile eventually emerges.
What?
She asks, in an odd mix of amazement and confusion. You know, I actually tried writing poetry for you.
Really?
Yeah, it was real cheesy shit, too.
Well, do share.
Well, you know prose has never been my thing. It was real clunky. I distinctly remember. Though I know my work will wither and vanish into oblivion, I know my love for you springs eternal, and for that, it takes precedence over all else.
That's lovely. You wrote that back when we first met?
I didn't want to send it to you. It seemed pretty pretentious.
It is, but it's sweet nonetheless.
I was trying to find some way to express the feeling in rhyme. I couldn't.
Though a god in creation, all will fade. But with that all that I made, for it all I would trade for...
Oh, fuck off.
Rhyming's easy.
We talk for a while, and all is well. It's good to be with another person again, and over time we both forget what came before, and sleep in the same bed, until the hallucinations become unbearable. Until the Grey Man is right next to me, staring intently, and his surrounding shroud drawing ever closer. I can't handle it, and I spring out of bed. I get dressed and march out the door without saying a word. I feel suddenly compelled to go back to the cabin in the desperate hope that it hadn't been cleared out yet, that I could still see the tapes. I start to drive again, reaching it by midday and rushing in. To my shock, a woman with jet black hair is standing in the room collecting the tapes. "Hey!" I call out. She turns.
Oh, Charles, you're here now. Of course, I'm terribly sorry that you had to see any of these. You wouldn't have known what would happen.
"Who are you?"
Claire. My name's Claire. And the visions aren't going to get any better.
"What are you talking about?"
You saw the tapes. And I take it you see the gray man? He's not going to leave you alone, and you're only going to see more and more of him, and at some point, he's gonna make you his.
"What do you mean, take me?"
I'm so sorry, Charles. You really have no idea what you're a part of now. I do hope you understand the necessities of what I'm doing, and understand I take no joy in doing it.
She pulls a revolver out of her back pocket, points it at me. "What the fuck?"
Better me than him.
She states coldly, before pulling the trigger.